when we think about how boys and men are talked to about feelings and what feelings are, we're told that, basically there's only certain feelings that men should have. Shouldn't have fear. Don't be a pussy. Don't be a weakling. Don't be a wimp. Like, the worst thing for a man is to show fear. Don't be sad as a man. Don't be weak. Don't be a victim. So we don't get a lot of education as young men on emotions, and we typically get told not to feel them. So then when you come to this space and people are saying, what do you feel? I don't fucking know what I feel. I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't know what I feel. And that is concerning, because feelings are just data. So this is what I teach men, this is what I teach leaders. Feelings are data. I work with 6 main feelings, and everything is a root of these main feelings. So it's fear, joy, anger, sadness, disgust, and interest. And the point of these things is our experience, our feelings are telling us about our experience in the world, and it's data to use. And I don't look at feelings as being negative or positive. They are what they are, and all of them are useful. And as men, at young ages, we're told we can't experience those. So we're turning off a huge part of our human experience, a huge part of the data of what is going on in the world. And no wonder we have men that don't know how to communicate, have no self-awareness.
Lee Povey, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I'm honored that you're here, so thank you. I appreciate you driving up for this. We spoke, I think it was last week.
Was, yeah.
Quick intro. And you're the first person I've talked to before an episode, like prep call, where I shared the idea of the show, and you were like, we're talking about men's groups. Like, here's what it is. I'm like, great, done. So we're here to talk about men's groups. I think we're at the early days of men's groups having a bit of a moment in pop culture and media. I mean, people keep sending me articles, like CNN article or a segment on Good Morning America that's highlighting men's groups, like a place for men to open up. And I want to learn more about this. And I also want people listening to this show who are as young as 23, 25 and up to, mid-30s, late 30s, expose them to what men's groups are all about. So instead of asking you like, hey, give me your backstory and what do you do and all that stuff, I'd love to ask a bit of a different question to kick us off. Who are you?
Yeah, who cares about what I do? Who am I? I'm a man, and thank you for inviting me, Jake. I'm a man who didn't want to take after his father.
Okay.
I think that's the simplest way to start the premise into this. As a young teenager, I realized that my dad was not a good role model for me. He didn't have a lot of male friends that were good role models for me. I didn't know what I was searching for, but I knew that I wanted some kind of mentorship. Even now, in my 50s, I still look for mentorship, and I'm still looking for wise men to be around. They don't necessarily need to be older than me, but wise to teach me. And I didn't know what to do with that. So to begin with, I just became very independent. So as a teenager, I was super independent. I was typically the person that people would come to with their issues and their problems. And I remember a friend of mine who was 10 years older than me that I used to box with saying, "You're the most well-adjusted person I know." I was 18 when he said that to me. Obviously, he had no idea what was going on in my head, because if he did, he wouldn't have thought that. But I projected that I had everything under control. And then I got to my early 20s and I wasn't happy, and I didn't really know why I was making some of the choices I was making. I didn't like some of the choices I was making, especially around relationships with women. And I wasn't happy. And I had back issues, and I went to see a chiropractor in the UK, and he said, some of this is physical, like I'm doing a lot of sports and high-level sports, breakdowns happen, but a lot of it was stress as well. And I had a pretty stressful job. I was a manager of a real estate agent. I was the youngest manager in the firm, and I was very motivated, but I wasn't happy, and I didn't have good friendships and good romantic relationships. So he recommended I see a therapist. And it took me about 6 months of cajoling from him to eventually see the therapist. Men in the UK don't see therapists. Young men in the UK don't see therapists. We're talking 30 years ago when men didn't see therapists at all. Mm-hmm. So it took some cajoling, but I'm so thankful to that man that he did that and encouraged me to do it. I started seeing a therapist, And, part of that journey was he was in men's groups. So was the guy that recommended me to it. And they both said, hey, come to a men's group and see what it's about. I had no idea what it was going to be about. And it was very different from what I thought it was going to be about. And that was a catalyst for me understanding how to be a man in the world and how to have relationships with men and women that I wanted.
Okay. What happened at the first men's group that you showed up to that was eye-opening and surprising?
There was a little bit more ritual than I'd necessarily thought about. So they use that particular group's called MKP, Mankind Project, one of the largest men's groups collectives in the world. And they use Jungian psychology. So you sit down and they kind of call in the archetypes. So it's the lover, the king, the warrior, and the magician. And somebody will stand up and say, I am the magician, and kind of speak to how they feel about that today. I'd never heard stuff like that before. And then everybody sat in a circle. Everybody was equal. They took it in turns to lead each week, so there was no leader. And they spoke about themselves and they spoke about their feelings. So they sat there and they said, hey, I'm checking in today and I feel sadness or I feel anger. And this is why I feel sadness and anger. And it's like, I think there was 12 guys or 11 guys in this group. And I'd never been in anything like this. I'd never been in a circle of men all facing each other, talking for the sake of sharing.
Had you ever even thought about what you were feeling?
I didn't even know what feelings were.
Yeah.
So, when we think about how boys and men are talked to about feelings and what feelings are, we're told that, basically there's only certain feelings that men should have. Shouldn't have fear. Don't be a pussy. Don't be a weakling. Don't be a wimp. Like, the worst thing for a man is to show fear. Mm-hmm. That's considered effeminate. You get all kinds of homosexual slurs related to fear, like, step away from that. That's horrible. Yet we all feel fear, and fear is a good and natural feeling. Sadness. Don't be sad as a man. Don't be weak. Don't be a victim. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have some anger, but not too much, and then only in appropriate circumstances. And often we get those circumstances wrong about when we should display anger. And then joy. And even joy, men aren't told you shouldn't have too much joy in your life, right? And if you do have joy, it's about your sports team winning or something like that. It's not walking down the road and going, they're really nice flowers. Mm-hmm. I like those, or I smell those flowers and I like it. And we'll come to that in a minute about how that's come up in some of my men's groups. So we don't get a lot of education as young men on emotions, and we typically get told not to feel them. So then when you come to this space and people are saying, what do you feel? Your point is perfect. I don't fucking know what I feel. I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't know what I feel. Mm-hmm. And that is concerning because feelings are just data. So this is what I teach men, and this is what I teach leaders. Feelings are data. I work with 6 main feelings, and everything is a root of these main feelings. So it's fear, joy, anger, sadness, disgust, and interest. And from those 6 main feelings, fear can be a little bit of anxiety to abject terror, all in the same family, and just where are you located along that feeling. And the point of these things is our experience, our feelings are telling us about our experience in the world. And it's data to use. And I don't look at feelings as being negative or positive. Mm-hmm. They are what they are, and all of them are useful. And as men, at young ages, we're told we can't experience those. So we're turning off a huge part of our human experience, and a huge part of the data of what is going on in the world. Yeah. And no wonder we have men that don't know how to communicate, have no self-awareness.
I'm wondering, and part of me thinks like it's pretty obvious. I don't even need to ask the question, but I will ask, which is, historically, where did this come from? What happened in our societies or in our country, in the world, that like we found ourselves in this position? I would assume probably peaked in the 1900s, 1800s, maybe even, of just this like no feelings. If you're going to have them, they're very little, and we put up this mask. Why did we end up there?
Great question. I'm not an expert on that. Not an expert on history of why we've ended up here. I'm an expert on where we're at now. At a guess, I would say probably the mix of religion and the industrial complex, and needing to put people into certain boxes so that things got done. When you think about how humans evolved, We evolved in a tribal way, and we kind of spread out from Africa and went out and explored the world and went into all these different sections of the world. But before the industrial age, communities were small. There was no such thing as marriage. We didn't marry for love. We mated with various different people, and there was more polygamy. And then men would go and hunt, and women would typically do more of the gathering and the raising of the children, and men would sit in circles and talk to each other, and they'd have stories, and they might use some kind of plant medicine to communicate with each other and bond with each other. Then we got to the industrial age, and that just gone. And then we kind of introduced, sinning and shame and all of these things that you should be shameful if you behave in this particular way, or you're wrong if you behave in this particular way. So suddenly there became a lot more rules to society as well. And the rules weren't necessarily in the benefit of the tribe. The rules were to keep people in place to be productive human beings.
And where are we today?
Lost, I think. I think of myself. So I go back to that young boy. My vision of a man was what I was learning from media. So sports heroes.
Yeah, what were you seeing?
Other men. Movies. How many of us look at a movie and go, oh, I want to be like that guy, because that guy's getting all the women. And when you're young, a lot of the way that we think is evolved around having sex and being successful, whatever version of that we think of at the time. Typically in Western societies, it's having things and it's making money, and it's making money so that you can have things. So do I have a nice watch? Do I have a nice car? And I think about how important having a nice car was to me when I was in my early 20s. And look, I do go-kart racing. I like cars more than most people anyway, but still kind of the status image of that. I remember my first serious job, I took the job because it came with a car. It came with a car, it came with a new car. That was a big deal.
Sure.
So I think society has created, and basically advertising and marketing have created this version of what being a man is that doesn't actually match the psychology or the physiology of how our bodies and brains behave.
Cool. How would you paint a picture of the disconnect then?
I think it's a very narrow sphere of what a man is. Typically hyper-masculine, based around physical performance, looks, ability to protect oneself. And when I look at the men that come to my men's group, the breadth of how they show up in the world is much larger. Typically the hero, if you think of something like Drive, the film Drive, where the protagonist doesn't talk for the first 45 minutes of the film and is incredibly violent. I don't experience that in everyday life. I don't experience men that don't want to talk at all or don't communicate, and I don't experience a lot of violence in the circle of men that I'm in. So there's this vision of what it is to be a man, and then there's the reality of actually what is it to be a man in modern society with all of the constraints we have and all of the requirements we have and all of the things that we need to do to survive.
Yeah. Maybe a good jumping off point from here is masculine education. Are we initiating or teaching masculinity today? How have we taught it in the last 100 years? How should we be teaching it tomorrow?
I think typically how a boy learns to be a man is his father. And if we just think about our own, development as children, when we look at our parents, mum and dad, they are the embodiment of the woman and the man to us, if we are lucky enough to have two parents. And we look at them and then we're looking at their traits and thinking, well, that's how I should be as a man, or that's how I should be as a girl. And then we go outside of that and then we meet society. And we go to schools now where 70 to 80% of the teachers are women. So there's a huge lack of kind of men and male energy in schools and teaching boys. And Richard Reeves, a researcher, speaks a lot about this and how men these days are being taught more how to be more like women than kind of encouraged for the differences in our psychology. And I'm talking very generally, like take an individual man and woman and they can be very similar to each other, very different to each other, but generally how we show up and how we want to show up, there's not a lot of healthy representation of that. So if we talk about the ways that men are being taught, a lot of the stuff online right now that particularly that appeals to young boys is hyper masculinity, use people, use women, even use your friends, get ahead, hustle. The person who works the hardest is the person who's going to win. No mention of community, friendships, looking after people. Mm-hmm. Now, to me, masculine qualities are having good friendships, being a good friend, being reliable, mm-hmm. caring for people. You know, when I think about one of the most masculine qualities that we can have, it is caring for other people, being prepared. And that could mean in times of war, going to war to support your country. But that also means showing up for people, being there for people. And, you know, what do we value about men? We value our ability to problem solve. But then we end up with all of these men that think their job is to solve problems, but they've got no problems to solve anymore, right? So they feel that they're useless because there's no problems to solve. So then they go around in their relationships and try to solve everybody's problems, and they haven't learned how to listen. I think being able to sit with another human being and listen to them without thinking you have to fix them or jump in or give them solutions is one of the most manly things that you can do. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And many men struggle with that.
I am guilty of this. I have been guilty of this, and I know everybody else is, which is we're sitting on the couch with our partner or a friend or anybody, but in this case, girlfriend for me. She's sad. She's upset about something, and I'm trying to fix it. But she just needs me to listen. How do we listen better? What's the tactical, actionable guide for dudes on how to be a better listener?
Yeah, great question. Great question. This is my journey too. I flip between being the best listener you've ever met and the worst listener that you've ever met.
What does each look like?
So let's start with the worst. The worst is I'm getting to the solution to your problem immediately. Mm-hmm. My gift is I see solutions. I'm taking a lot of information very quickly. My brain works fast. I can see lots of solutions. However, that's not how people's brains work. So if we look at the psychology of how our brains work, and I think it helps if we look at that first and then how to be efficient and effective. So when we're feeling something, we have three areas of our brain primarily. If we're going to make things super simple, because I like to make things simple. So we have the emotive part of our brain. So this could be the childlike part of our brain. This is the emotive part of our brain. This is our animal instinctive part. So this is the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn system. Something happens to us, we have this reaction. Do I want to fight? Do I want to run away? Do I stop in my tracks? Or do I try to feed the animal so that it doesn't bite me? And when we're in that mode, that needs to be worn out before we can get into the cognitive part of our brain. And this is where the venting comes in. This is where the just being with somebody and letting them talk comes in. When we express from that part of our brain, one, it's very activating. It's got a lot of energy. You know, you wake up in the middle of the night, your brain's going crazy. That has a huge amount of energy, much more than the cognitive part of our brain. So it just overwhelms the cognitive part of our brain. Two, when we actually speak aloud, not only are you hearing us, but we're hearing ourselves. So we're actually doing our own work. This is why talk therapy works, because we're also processing ourselves as well as the therapist is helping us process. So I'm talking, I'm venting all my frustrations. If I'm allowed to fully vent and wear that part of my brain out, I'll get to a point at the end of it where I'll go, you know what, I feel better now. Thanks for listening. Mm-hmm. You've done nothing apart from provide space for me to self-process. Mm-hmm. That is a gift in itself. And I think that's something that most people miss when they're trying to be valuable. Wonderful human trait. I want to be valuable. I want to support you. I want to take away your pain to your girlfriend. If you give her the room to express her own feelings, the cognitive part of her brain hears the emotional part of her brain and goes, oh God, it's not as bad as I thought it was. This is over the top. I've overreacted to it. That text didn't really mean what it meant. Or, you know, that phone call with my friend where we got a bit agitated, it's not really as bad as I thought it was. So giving space to us to be able to process our own emotions and process what we're hearing from a cognitive point of view, super useful. One tactic is just to say to somebody, are you looking to vent or do you want solutions?
Yeah, I've heard that before, which is literally ask, like, basically, which version of me do you want right now? Are we in solution mode? Are we in problem solving mode? Are we in listening mode? It feels almost weird and just uncomfortable to look at someone and ask them, like, do you want me to solve your problem or you want me to just listen?
Yeah.
But in the few times in my life where I've actually asked that question, every single time, people are like, oh my God, thank you so much for asking. I think right now I'd just like for you to listen. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Zip. Are we teaching this to young men?
I don't know that we're teaching this to young men or young women, to be honest. I would wish that we would teach. Let me go back a step. If we look at how successful people behave in the world, one of the biggest indicators of success is our ability to get on with other human beings. If you want to be successful, you need people around you that also want you to be successful and going to help you be successful, especially people I work with, founders, entrepreneurs. You need to create teams. Leaders need to create teams.
Yeah.
To do that, you have to have a reasonable understanding of yourself and a reasonable level of emotional intelligence. So I would much rather we taught that to kids than say maths beyond basic maths. You know, we have computers in our pockets now that are more powerful than the computers that sent man to the moon, many times more powerful. So a huge focus on complex mathematics at school is just a waste of everybody's time. Beyond those that want to go on and have a career in maths. And maths was my favorite subject. My favorite subject at school, maths and physics. I'm really good at maths and physics. However, now that I'm out of elite sports, I don't use it very often.
Yeah.
So I think we put too much focus on that and not enough focus on how we actually communicate with each other and how important that is, how we form alliances, how we give feedback. So you're talking about awkwardness. I teach feedback clinics. So I teach these workshops on feedback. The first thing I tell people with giving feedback is asking permission first. So saying, well, are you open to some feedback? I saw some things. I'd love to give you some feedback. Are you open to it? If somebody says no, unless it's mission critical, you don't give them the feedback. Yeah, okay. Another time, if you're open to it, let me know. And it's the same as, do you want me to listen? Or do you want me to problem solve? Like, what do you need from me? Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of these cases, and you highlighted it so well, Jake, a lot of these cases, we are trying to take somebody else's discomfort or pain away. And it's really about us. I want to feel good by being the hero. Yeah. And we can talk about the drama triangle, which is a fun model, but I want to be good by being the hero and take your discomfort away. And actually what you want to be is the coach, which is a healthy model of the hero, which is how do I support you in taking away your own pain? Mm-hmm. Another way to think of it is, do I fish for you and catch the fish and give you fish, or do I teach you to fish and now for the rest of your life you can go and feed yourself? Mm-hmm. I would much rather do the latter because that enables people and that gives people the ability to have much more fulfilling and successful lives.
Mm-hmm. You call it the drama triangle. Is that victim, villain, hero?
It is, yeah.
I learned about that in therapy when I was probably 22, 23 or so. I found it wildly profound, and it's come up many times in my life since, which has been about a decade. But what I have found is it's very challenging to communicate and relate to people who have never heard of this. I found they feel patronized if I bring it up. Or it's like, oh, you have your cool, like, fancy therapy language now. Like, you're so smart. Let's start with what is it? The 101 on the drama triangle.
Yeah, so it's a relational model. And when we're in relationship with each other, we tend to hold different positions that we are not aware of. So there's 3 positions in the drama triangle. There is the hero, there is the victim, and there is the persecutor or the villain. And take you and your girlfriend's example. Your girlfriend could be the victim. Oh, worries me, I have these problems. You jump in as a hero. Let me take your pain away. Let me solve it for you. You two then get in this dynamic where she expects you to take your pain away. You can't take her pain away because it's her pain, not your pain. You can't physically take someone's pain away. She's going to have to deal with that herself at some point. So now you become the villain because you can't take her pain away. And now she's like, you're no good to me. Now you're telling me what to do and I don't want you to. And why are you being like this? And you're like, what the hell is going on? Now suddenly you're the victim. Mm-hmm. She's persecuting you.
Very complicated.
And we dance around in these positions. And typically we have a default setting that we like. And when we go into the ones that we don't like, we get very uncomfortable. So for me, my default setting was hero. The healthy version of hero is coach. Well, I've made a career out of being a coach, so no wonder that's my default setting.
Yeah.
The one I hate the most is victim. I hate being a victim.
Yeah.
I hate being in that space. However, what that meant was I had a problem being vulnerable. I had a problem asking for help because I saw that as being a victim instead of, oh, it's okay for me to ask for help. I don't always have to be the hero of myself or other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I recommend people look this up. Cartman's drama triangle. It's called. Plenty of really good videos online about it.
Yeah.
And it's worth looking at your relationships and starting to identify what role am I playing and how do I step out of this? How do I not get drawn into somebody wanting me to be their hero and then getting annoyed with me when I can't fix them, for example?
Switch gears back to men's groups. I'm not in a men's group currently, though I really want to be. And I have a couple of different friends, close guy friends, that have all mentioned over the last year or two they want to start a men's group. And I'm like, great, yeah, count me in. Let me know when we meet. And then it kind of doesn't happen. And so between this podcast and this conversation and some men, I'm like, I'm gonna start it already, or I need to join one. The first thought I have is, how can we, one, encourage more guys who are younger, maybe college age or in their early 20s, to go out and create their own men's group? Where do you start? How do you identify who should be there and how many people should be there and what do you talk about and when do you meet and kind of the playbook on, like, you need to start a men's group, here's where to start?
Yeah. I would go and look for one that's already established, number one. I think, when I think back to myself as a 17, 18, 19-year-old boy, I wasn't a man yet, as a boy, I didn't have the knowledge, I didn't have the language, which is the most important part of it, to start a men's group or to be able to effectively run a men's group. And one of the most important things about men's group is you need to know how to have healthy conflict. You can't have a successful men's group without healthy conflict. So you need to know how to be able to do that in a way that doesn't end up in fighting or shouting or anger, but ends up in some kind of resolution and typically some kind of self-understanding. Why am I here and how has this happened? So I would look for I think MKP is great. They also have a young guys version, which the name escapes me right now. And there's a rite of passage that we miss in societies now. So you look back in tribal times, typically the rite of passage would be, both male and female would have to do some kind of task, typically alone, something where they kind of have to go off into the wilderness, maybe to survive for a week or something by themselves, or a weekend by themselves, or they had to go and have their first hunt, their first kill. And there was this psychological jump from being a boy to a man or from a girl to a woman. Yeah. We don't have that anymore. Yeah. When I think now of, part of the former career I had as an elite sports coach was I particularly liked working with talented young kids because I took the role of mentorship very seriously, and I saw that much more than just helping them be good athletes. I thought I want them to be even better human beings and support them in being successful human beings. And there wasn't really any rite of passage for these kids to go from, okay, I've gone from school, go to university, there's a bit of a rite of passage there, I leave home, hopefully, but there's not a lot of stress in it, really. There's not a lot of independence. They go and typically live with other kids. There's not an opportunity for them to be by themselves and really have that moment of growth. So I think finding something where you get an opportunity like that, where there's some kind of challenging weekend or a treat that you go on that gives you this experience of transformation. And that's where I would start if I was younger. I would look for existing groups, find one that you think fits you. Just Google men's group near me, see what comes up. And I would focus on ones that aren't talking too much about masculinity, but are talking more about community, purpose, how you be a better version of yourself, and have a lot of tools on self-understanding. So how do I understand myself better so that I can communicate better and be a better member of communities?
What are your thoughts on the phrase masculinity? And what are your thoughts on the phrase toxic masculinity?
Yeah. Masculinity in itself, I don't spend a lot of time talking about it, which for somebody that spent 30 years in men's groups, I coach both men and women in reasonably equal numbers. In my men's groups, we very rarely talk about masculinity. we talk about how to be a better human. And that's how I think about it. Like, how do you be a better human? And then how do you take traits that you might have as a man and make sure that they're healthy expressions of those traits rather than the kind of the shadow expressions or the unhealthy expressions? So I find the kind of talk about masculinity interesting because I just want to be a better human. And I am a man, and I want to be a better man because I'm a man, but I just want to be a better human and create better humans. And then when I hear toxic masculinity, I think it gets weaponized for anything that people don't like, and especially any kind of behavior that women don't like. So not all things that are called toxic masculinity are toxic, number one. And number two, there's a shaming element to it. Now, if you ever want to improve somebody's behavior, shaming them is not the way to do it. We've all done it. You know, you shouldn't do it like this, you should do it like that. I had this argument with my wife yesterday. She's like, why are you shaming me? Getting it wrong again. You know, if we can step away from shaming and instead step into invitation, how do I invite you into being a better human being? So I like to think of it as immature masculinity because I want you to have the opportunity to grow. Like, there's a different version of you where you're going to be happier. The relationships you're going to have are going to be much better. The way you move around in the world is going to be more effortless, and you're going to be more successful in whatever way you want to be it money, be it commitment, be it community, be it connection.
Okay. So what would you say is the relationship then between emotional maturity, mature masculinity as well, and genuine strength? And then how do men's groups and coaching in general help facilitate the transition and the relationship between those two things?
Before we do that, do you mind if I ask you what you think masculinity is?
Yeah. Well, I started this podcast and content series to explore that because I wasn't really, still not really sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone really knows anymore. On one hand, I think about the energy of like feminine versus masculine energy. And the way I've come to understand what that means, and largely through David Deda's books that I read years ago, which are good, but also a little controversial.
I read that book on a plane from UK to New York before I moved here.
Yeah.
The day after I'd split up with a girl that I'd been with for 2 years, bawled my eyes out for the entire flight, like hiding myself under my baseball cap.
Yeah, heavy book. The Way of the Superior Man, if anyone's listening. I bought it, first time I visited Los Angeles, I was 24 maybe, 23, something like that. And bought that book here in Santa Monica at some bookshop, read it on the beach that day. I was like, whoa, damn, we got a lot here. From what I've understood from that book and other things around that, my early 20s was masculine energy is largely about being decisive, being a decision maker, and working through conflict and emotions with logic versus emotion. And that was eye-opening because when you're young, you think masculinity means like you're jacked and you have sex with a lot of women if you're single and you can beat the shit out of anyone. And then you learn about like logic versus emotional decision making and how you process information. So I had that understanding of masculinity for probably a decade or so. And now it's changing a lot, and I'm curious about it because if I say that out in society these days, you get more eyebrows raised than you get support. And I think it's mostly because people aren't really sure. And the phrase toxic masculinity is pretty freaking viral now. It's a rampant term.
Same as mansplaining.
Mansplaining, which I'm probably doing right now even. And I think masculinity these days means a couple of things. What I'm catching myself doing is defining what I think it means to be a man, which is the problem because masculinity and being a man are not synonyms.
Yeah, I really like that.
And what I've come to recognize is I have a decent amount of feminine energy and masculine energy. The balance of the two is what makes me, me. And the balance of the two is what makes my friends and past partners them. And the mixing of my balance and their balance meshes or it doesn't. And then there's conflict. Sometimes you can get through it, sometimes you can't. And so when I think about masculinity now, it's largely surrounding concepts of how I provide for others. It used to mean like provide financially. That's about it. Like put food on the table and have a nice roof over someone's head that I provided. But now I think it means with strength and confidence, providing listening and holding space.
Providing this opportunity for men to talk about being a man and for us to have educated conversations on things that are nuanced and complex.
Yeah. And then there's the next P, which is protect, which comes up a lot in this show. And it's the other P and the two Ps. Protect used to mean like if you were to get mugged or attacked at a bar, I can protect you. I can fight them off. But I think protect now means that plus I can protect you emotionally. I can protect you from me. I'm not going to freak the fuck out when you have a bad day and you bother me because of it. I can protect you from yourself. I think a lot of people need that in their life. But now the overlap of protecting and providing is huge. There's a huge overlap because it's like by providing you a safe environment, that's protection as well. By protecting you from yourself, that's providing you with coaching or guidance. So I think masculinity lies somewhere in that conversation nowadays around providing and protecting and doing it a lot better and in more modern ways than we have in the last couple hundred years.
And I think what you're highlighting there is why men are struggling so much. Professor Scott Galloway talks about the most dangerous thing in society right now is an unhappy, unsatisfied young man, alone and broken. And the reason is because I think men used to find a lot of purpose in providing and protecting. Well, nowadays, women don't need us to provide for them anywhere near as much as they used to. If we look at statistics, 2 times as many women are going to graduate college as men in the next 5 years. Women are leaving college and get better careers than men are. Men are getting left behind financially. When I look at the companies that I work with, in most of the companies that I work with, the percentage of new hires is female, or the higher percentage of new hires is female. They're better educated, they're doing better in school, they're coming out more prepared, they're emotionally more developed because we value that in women, we value that emotional intelligence and development. So going back to the not teaching men how to use their emotions and what emotions are. And I kind of want to challenge a little bit about what you said about using logic and emotions. And I want people to think of it slightly differently. We are all going to have an emotional reaction. That is how the system's designed to work, is to have an emotional reaction. It's learning how to self-regulate during that emotional reaction. And then from that self-regulation, taking what is the data that this emotion is telling me, and then using our cognitive part of our brain to put this with, right, okay, what's the reality in the world? What would a camera record right now, rather than what's the stories that I'm making up in my brain that go with this emotional response? So how do I regulate myself? Pick fact from fiction. Daniel Kahneman has done a huge amount of work on this about how bad human beings, men and women, are at making logical decisions. So most of us, in fact, all of us, don't make as many logical decisions as emotional ones. So this is why emotional intelligence and self-regulation is so important. Because if we don't understand that, we can't even get to the point of making logical decisions. So I think when we kind of look at all of this together, and I really like what you said about, I have feminine energy. I'm very loving. I'm also 6'2", 205 pounds, former elite athlete. I've never struggled to feel manly. Never even thought about it until I broke my shoulder in a crash in 2010. And it was the first time in my life I thought, I don't know what I would do if somebody attacked me and my girlfriend right now. I never even thought about it before. That was the kind of the luxury. And I remember coming home one day and my wife had a bunch of her friends around and they were watching this video. And the video was talking about the different experiences that men and women have in the world. And the question it asked was, when did you last feel afraid? The women in the room could remember the last time they felt afraid, and it was all within the last week that they physically felt afraid. I couldn't remember the last time I physically felt afraid. So I think we just have these such different experiences as men and women, and that's okay. And then what are we going to do with it?
Yeah. It's been on my mind a lot for 10 years, this concept of like logic versus emotion, how you work through things, how you process information. And I don't like that, like the way the superior man, the way it laid it out was like masculine men were logical, feminine women, they're emotional. Like that was so divisive.
Well, we can see by women doing better in school than boys right now that women have no problems with logic either.
Totally. And I spent my 20s just like observing the world with that as one of the many things I had learned over my 20s, but that was one of the things that stuck with me. And I look around all the time and I'm like, this guy, that seems the most like a macho, manly dude, super emotional, very illogical in his decision making. This woman seems extremely feminine from the outside, very logical in her decision making. And that takes place at work, it takes place with friends, family, definitely comes up with dating, as I'm currently single, but have been in and out of relationships in my 20s. And it's like, where did that come from? And then you start to realize, oh, here we are, 2025, and the definition of masculinity and femininity, very blurred. The lines are blurred. The overlap of them is vast. The question, the curiosity between them is vast. And so here we are. It's a mess. And my gut is like, that's a problem. We need to fix that. We need to work our way out of it. Is that a problem?
I think not. I think how I approach it is to drop the terms and just think about how do I be a good human being?
Yeah.
And to be a good human being, I'm going to embrace some masculine traits and some female traits, or what are typically have been thought of as masculine and female traits. And I'm going to figure out what's my best version of them. How do I fit in the world? How do my particular talents fit in the world? And how do I maximize those talents? So when I think of some of my talents, I'm really good at creating community. You know, we're sitting here and I'm like, right, I'm going to sort a men's group for us and I won't fuck around and I'll get it done and we'll get 8 guys together and we'll meet, you know, once or twice a month, whatever we set, and we'll do it. So I'm good at creating community. Wherever I've been in my life, I've created community. I'm very reliable. I'm good at seeing patterns. I'm also good at displaying love. Now, that typically is seen more as a feminine thing, but why? Well, fathers aren't meant to love their children. Fathers aren't meant to love their friends. At the beginning of the COVID, I started a men's group for me and my friends because I could see that, you know, everybody was struggling. It was a completely different world. Nobody knew what to do. And we were lonely. And we can get to male loneliness and loneliness in a minute. But we were lonely. So I started this men's group with my friends. And it was incredible how quickly our friendships changed completely and deepened because we had this space where for the first time, our job was to sit there, listen to another man. One of the rules was we couldn't fix them. We just sat there and listened. And if they wanted help, they would ask for help. But to begin with, we just sat and listened to each other.
Yeah.
And we'd never done that before. And I was getting them to ask questions that they'd never asked each other before. And the things that we learned about each other in those first 6 months were things that we didn't know and that we'd never found out about each other in kind of the previous 10 years. So it was amazing how that affected and changed our friendship. So to come back to the initial question, I don't know that, and other people have a different version. If there's lots of people that teach masculinity and femininity and it's a huge industry, personally, I think focus on being a better human and it'll all take care of itself.
I love that.
And again, when I think about my men's groups, we really don't spend a lot of time talking about masculinity. Men don't come asking about masculinity. They ask, how can I be a better man today?
Yeah.
That's it.
I'd like to share something that I haven't shared on the show yet. It's new, but it's been blowing my mind the last couple of weeks. And I'm really curious your perspective and opinion on this. Since I launched the podcast, I've gotten dozens and dozens of private messages from women. I was like, wow, this is weird. I'm launching this show about men's mental health. The listenership is about 50-50, but the people engaging are women. And they're sending me private, these are some friends, but mostly just like random women that find this thing on the internet. And the messages are all different, but essentially have the same core question, which is, my partner is a man, husband, boyfriend, fiance, whatever. And I can't get him to talk about his emotions with me. He doesn't even know how to do it. I can't get him to do it. I really want him to. What can I do? I'm like, I don't know the answer, but okay. So here I am now finding great guests to come on the show to essentially answer that question for these great women and for the men that clearly their woman like wants them to do something. But here's where I'm a little blown away, because then I get into conversation with some of them. I start asking these questions like, all right, like what are some of the most core values to you in a partnership? And they're naming things that are clearly being not met in the partnership, or they are being disobeyed in the partnership around communication or emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, stuff like that. I'm like, well, you just answered the question that you're probably afraid to ask out loud, which is, should I still be with this person? And the answer is right in front of you, and it's probably not. But they stay with that person. And it reminds me a lot of high school, where the high school hot girl is like, I'm sick of dating all these jocks. I want to be with a nice guy. And who's she saying that to? The nice guy, who's like, I'm fucking right here, waving my hand. I'm right here. And she's like, still goes to the jock. So the question essentially is like, what's up with that? Why is that happening?
So the first thing is why we're attracted to somebody else.
Okay.
And it's such an interesting subject. I wish I knew more about it. And we don't actually really understand a lot about why we're attracted to people. So, there's things like facial symmetry, smell, pheromones, location. So it happens to be convenient that you're near somebody else. That helps. And then what do we want in an ideal partner? Well, the problem is we meet people that we're physically attracted to. And then 6 months later, we go, is this the partner I want? But we haven't gone through what we should have done at the beginning, which is, here's some qualities that I really need in a partner. And then I want to meet somebody that I find physically attractive who also has these qualities. What we do is we select somebody that we find physically attractive. Yeah. And then we go, I hope that they have these qualities that I need. And when they don't, we go, no, I hope I can teach them. Mm-hmm. So, we try to change people. We all know how well trying to change somebody goes. My life's work for the last 30 years is helping people change in some way or other, be it as a elite sports person or be it now as a leader and as a man. And I've done men's groups all through that entire process. And what I see is you can't make somebody change who doesn't want to change. So if they don't want to change, they're not going to change, number one. Number two, everybody's journey is their own journey, and what even that change is and what it means for them and what they might want to change and transform into, completely down to them. How you want somebody to be, it's not gonna change them. Mm-hmm. And if it does, it'll only be temporary. They're changing to stay with you. They're not changing for themselves. So we should always want somebody to be on their own journey and grow for themselves, and just hope that we grow together. Like I hope that with my wife, we grow together and we don't grow apart. If we do grow apart, though, I have to respect that's her journey. And much as it will hurt, that's going to be her journey. I have to let her go, because that's what love would be, right? Mm-hmm. Not restricting her and holding her back. So I think that's the first thing, like why we're attracted to people. And then the second thing is this piece of what we started with. We're telling men at a young age, do not feel your emotions. The worst thing for a man is to be a pussy, right? And it doesn't even make sense, right? The hardest thing that humans do is to birth a child. So how is that weak? But we're saying, don't be effeminate, don't be weak, don't be a pussy, right? That's the worst thing that you can be as a man. And then we're saying to men suddenly, but I need you to connect with me emotionally. Yeah. They don't have the tools and they don't have the language. Mm-hmm. And when a woman says, I need you to connect with me emotionally, or I need you to understand your emotions, or meet me emotionally, men have no idea what to, as you said, when I first got to the men's group and somebody's saying, right, okay, check in with how you're feeling. Fucking idea. Right? No idea. Yep. So these women are suddenly asking these guys to undo 20, 30 years of programming and go, oh, this is how I feel. When you look at young kids, boys and girls, they have very similar emotional experiences. There is no difference between toddlers and babies about their emotional experiences. We train that out of them. And then suddenly we expect men to flick a switch like this and understand. Yeah. And also, I can give women a little bit of a hard time here. And I went on a woman's podcast and kind of challenged her around this. Women aren't really clear about what they want. what they want is they want a man to understand their emotions, but they don't want a man who's emotional. And this is what I see a lot. Like when a man is suddenly emotional, they don't know what to do with it and almost find it sexually repulsive. Like, well, he's too much, he's too emotional. When a man opens that Pandora's box and starts flooding out those emotions.
I've seen it happen to me, and I've seen it happen to a ton of people where a man's confidence out, hey, I had a terrible day. I'm feeling really sad right now, and this is what I need. Like, could not be more of a badass, in my opinion, way to approach your emotions. That's manly as fuck. And the woman's like, can't hold that. Not used to it. Throws her off. She's never, no man has ever looked her in the eyes and said something like that before. But yet she's like, but I want a man who knows how to communicate. Is emotionally intelligent. So
it's hard.
Really hard.
It's hard for men, and no wonder so many men are feeling unfulfilled and don't know how to have romantic relationships. And you're seeing the rise of these kind of incel and kind of, strongly right-wing and kind of anti-women movements. Because men are confused. They don't know their role in society. Especially in Western culture, we don't do a good job of saying, well, if you don't go to university, how about trade school? Like, just do something with your hands, right? You like fixing stuff? Let's teach you to fix stuff, and let's value as a member of society that fixes things, because we need people that fix things. It's an incredibly important skill. You look at any dating, like women's dating profiles, the amount of women's dating profiles that say, I would like a man who can fix things, right? So we kind of know that it's a valuable skill, but for some reason, we look at the educational system, we'll say the only value is if you go to university. And we should be looking at trade school just as valuable as university. So we have this issue. We've got women that think they want one thing, but they're not really clear about what it is. We're expecting men to suddenly undo decades of training where men don't have the language for it, don't have the skill set for it, may have a desire, but don't know how to go about it. And when they do try it, then the woman's like, oh, that wasn't really what I wanted. I wanted you to understand me, but I didn't necessarily want you to pour your emotions onto me, because now I don't know how to deal with it, because they haven't also experienced or been trained how to deal with a man's emotions. I experienced this too. I broke my shoulder, as I said, in 2010. First time in my life I've been truly vulnerable. My girlfriend at the time had no idea how to deal with that. Our relationship was, she was the victim, I was the hero. It was that dynamic. Not good for either of us now looking back, but at the time it made me feel powerful. And she was like, teach me, help me. When the roles reversed, I'm like, I feel really crap. Like I can't use my arm properly. I had to have 2 reconstructive surgeries. I felt weak. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I could do my sport anymore. She had no idea what to do with it. Like, she could look after me physically. She could feed me, help me shower, that kind of stuff. But emotionally, she didn't want anything to do with it. So to go back to answer the question, this is why so many women recommend men's groups to men. This is why so many women message me and say, can you get my husband to come to your men's group? I'm like, no, but I'm happy to have a chat with him and see if he wants to come to it. And it's difficult because I get men that come to my groups because their partners told them to come to the group, but they're doing it to please her. They're not doing it for themselves. About 50% of the time, those guys that come get an experience they were never expecting, and they don't leave because they're like, wow, I didn't even know I needed this in my life, and now I don't ever want to lose this from my life. The other 50% are like, what the fuck is this? And they get out before they can even get to that point of having the experience.
So what would be some advice, or if you wanted the women who are listening, what advice would you give to them? What do you want them to walk away with in terms of how can they better support and understand their partners, men in this case, that have 20, 30 years of programming against understanding their emotions and pouring it out? What questions can they ask them so that both partners feel great and supported and healthy? How can they react differently or better? What questions could they ask themselves? What do you think?
Oh man, what a great question. And I don't know I'm skilled enough to answer it. I'll try. Firstly, start with curiosity. Like, what is your understanding of a feeling? What is your understanding of emotion? How would you like to communicate differently? What are you curious about as a man about how me and you communicate? What are you curious about my experience in the world? So instead of the blame and shame of you're not meeting my needs, you're not good enough, you don't know how to communicate, start with the curiosity of where are you at right now? And where would you like to get to in our relationship? What would you like it to look like? And how do we co-create that together? Are you open to going to some therapy with me to talk about some of this stuff with a skilled moderator that's going to teach both of us?
Yeah. I'm a fan of the new, I've heard this phrase recently, relationship coaching.
Yeah.
Versus couples therapy. Couples therapy sounds so, you got problems if you're doing that, is the stigma. But relationship coaching, same thing, but just feels a lot more, oh yeah, we're badass, we're on top of this.
Framing is so important,
Huge.
right? Framing and marketing is so important. So yes, call it whatever you like. What we're looking for is some upskilling of how we communicate with each other for the betterment of both of us. And you, as a woman, although you might be more aware of your emotions and have conversations with your female friends about them, the conversations you're going to have with your male partner is going to be different. So you have to learn his language just as he has to learn your language. So there's this expectation that men must become more like women, but without an expectation for women to understand men more. It goes both ways. And if we do that, we're going to have much more successful relationships. So yeah, I love it. Relationship coaching, couples counseling, therapy, whatever way you want to look at it. And then encourage men to find spaces where they can be with other elevated, more mature, more, emotionally wiser men that can role model this stuff to them. Like, what does it look like to be a healthy man? Because, my biggest fear is we have so little of that societally right now, outside of things like men's groups. You're relying on having a good father. You're relying on your good father having other good male role models in his life that you, as a young man and young woman, can look up to. I watched a podcast with Dak Shepard on, and this has really, really stuck with me. He said one of the biggest motivators for him to do therapy and to understand himself better was when he had girls, he realized that his girls were going to date him. So they're looking up. That's a man. That's masculinity. So if he was being an ass, then they're going to go and date crappy blokes.
Yeah.
So he's looking at it and going, who do I want my women to date? How do I become that man to role model to them who I want my young girls to date? And I think that's an incredibly smart way of looking at it. Like, how do we show up as men to attract the women that we want? We're going back to these guys at the moment that are struggling to meet men. Well, they're not showing up as men that are going to attract women that they actually want, or they're looking at the wrong women and then wondering why these relationships fail. And then, how are we showing up as role models and what are we providing? I think the world needs a lot more spaces for men to come together and to talk about what healthy masculinity looks like. I want to try to create some kind of program and teaching and community with podcasts like this, with online learning, with men's groups that men can come to, because there's so little space for that. And a lot of it is also kind of tribal, right? Even some of the men's groups are still kind of the immature masculinity rather than mature masculinity. And it's more focused on doing and being tough and physical achievement than it is, how do I show up as a kind, decent man?
Yeah. This whole conversation reminded me of this video that I saw that went pretty viral like a month ago. This was right before TikTok got banned. The video was, you may have seen this, but it was a older guy, probably in his, early 60s or something, sitting in his backyard. And he's holding a spool of wire. Did you see this video?
No.
The spool of wire had just a little bit of wire left. His wife is filming, and she comes over. She's like, "Honey, what are you doing?" And he's sitting there, and he's crying, like tearing up a little bit. Got a gray hoodie on, like a Jets hat, and he's like, "It's crazy. This spool of wire. I've had it for 20 years. It's like it represents like my life, and it's almost gone. And it's like I've gone through so much life with this wire, and it's this metaphor, right?" Very beautiful, like emotional moment this man is having. He says this to his wife, the woman that he probably should trust with everything in the world. And she goes, "I thought you were crying because you were wearing a Jets hat." And he goes, "Fuck this." And he tosses the wire and he gets up and he walks away. Video ends. The comment section on this video were outrageous. Basically, every comment was some flavor of, "And that is why men don't open up. That man will never open up again." And I read that and it broke my heart of like, fuck.
I bet.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've had the same experience many times, but certainly sometimes. I mean, I'm blessed to have a mother and a sister that are very like warm and open and encouraging about me sharing stuff like that with them, and they love it, and they're very supportive. I've had some girlfriends in my life that have been warm to that, some that have not. But to see that there are this many men who are like, yeah, this is why. The second you open up to a woman, she just like fucking makes you feel like shit about it. That's the experience that they've had. It's pretty sad. And I hope that that's something that will change. I hope that this podcast is something that can help change that. I hope that if there's anything that the listener, if you're listening to this, gets out of it, it's make that man sit next to him and be like, yeah, wow.
Tell me more.
Tell me more.
Right? That's what we need. We need more curiosity in life. We're quick to make judgments. We're quick, as you said, to take pain away. And what happens when we take pain away, or we try to take pain away from people, is the pain's growth. Sadness is okay. And I really want to be very clear about this. As far as I'm concerned, there's no negative emotions. There may be negative experiences that go with emotions, but their emotions themselves aren't negative. They are telling you something. Sadness is telling you about loss. Fear is telling you about the future and what might be, and do you need to be prepared and what might happen. Joy and anger are things that happen in the moment. Right? Is a boundary being crossed right now? Am I being denied something I need right now? Am I not being heard right now?
Yeah.
Or am I in a moment where I'm just being present? You cannot really feel joy without present or presence.
I met this doctor at a wedding a few months back. We were talking like out by a fire pit outside this wedding. And he was a really fascinating guy. And he was very pragmatic about his work. And he teaches, now he's a professor, I want to say, at like Harvard Medical School or one of these top medical schools. And he was saying something to the tune of, I teach my students to look at illness not as something terrible that's happening to the patient. Patient's like, oh my God, I'm sick. This is terrible. And it's brings up a lot of sad, difficult emotions. Instead, let's look at illness as more information to better understand ourselves. We're all going to have illnesses. We're going to have bugs and issues. And of course, you can feel the emotion of it, but take it as an opportunity to better understand ourselves. I think what you're saying is kind of the same thing. Like, take your feelings as, feel them, awesome, but use it as data and information to just better understand who you are, better diagnose yourself.
Yeah.
When you put it that way, it's so obvious.
And we can go a bit broader than that, right? So the world is either happening to us or we're in control. So one of my favorite books, I'm rereading it now, me and one of my clients are reading through it together at the moment, is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't read it, if you're listening to this, please read it. It's the story of a Jewish doctor in a Nazi concentration camp, or in fact, various Nazi concentration camps, and what he observes about the human psyche from this experience. And the biggest takeaway from this experience is the only thing we can control is our reaction to things. That is the only thing that we have. So the way that we look at our life's experience, the way that we frame our life's experience, how we choose to experience things, that's what we have control in. We can't control getting sick or not. I mean, sure, you can be healthier and you can eat better, but we're all going to get some kind of sickness and illness, and accidents happen. You know, yeah, I couldn't have crashed my bike if I didn't race my bike, but I've got to do some things in life that are fun, right? Yeah. So you put ourselves in some situations with risk. So what we can control is how we choose to show up and how we choose to react. So if we go back to our emotional model of, we have the emotive part of our brain, childlike part of our brain, then we have the executive function, cognitive part of our brain, and then we have the computer. And the computer is our stored memories and responses. And often what we need to do is rewire the computer. So you're driving down the road, somebody cuts you up. Me, I would have flipped the bird at them, and I'm getting angry, and you toss them, why are you doing this? And my immediate response is anger, because I'm threatened. So, you know, I respond to the threat by fight, right? I want to fight you because you threatened me. When I learn to be curious and wonder what's going on for that person, like, are they having a bad day? Are they just split up with a partner? Are they just been fired? Are they late for work? Are they rushing to the hospital to meet somebody? When I come from that lens, it's much easier to have empathy and kindness and go, oh, it's not about me. Mm-hmm. They're not doing it to me. And then I can respond with, it's not about me. It's nothing to do with me. So why would I even react? It's just, okay, it is what it is. And I think when we can move to moving through the world in this way of, it is not about me. People are not doing things to me primarily. They're just trying to do the best they can with what they have and the skill set that they have. Sometimes that skill set lets them down and that affects us, but it's not really about me. Then you can make these choices of what experience do I want in life instead of I'm spending my life being reactive. And most of us spend our lives being reactive, not conscious. And there's some really good work by a company called a Conscious Leadership Group. There's a coach called Jim Defmer, and he calls this concept above and below the line. So below the line is our emotive, instinctual, animalistic response, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And then above the line is how would we like to be instead? And I use this a lot with leaders. I use this in my men's groups. What I'm wanting for people is to understand where they are, locate what's happening for you right now, and then consciously choose where do I want to be instead. And that's what's rewiring this computer. So instead of going back to my normal instinctual actions, A happens, this is how I react to A happens, well, now I'm going to react differently to A because I'm rewiring the computer on my reaction. And that takes a lot of conscious thought. And the first part of that is just noticing what's going on. Oh, this is how I typically react to this situation. Do I want to keep reacting like that, or would I like to react differently? But you've got to go through the noting process first of, well, this is interesting, and getting really curious about yourself, which when you start doing it is a fun thing to do. And I'm curious, when you first learned about the drama triangle, were you seeing that in action everywhere around you?
Yes. And I very quickly was like, oh shit, I'm the hero all the time. And it just became so obvious, and I still do it. In a lot of ways. I mean, having a podcast makes me feel like a hero, right? Makes me feel good to help people solve problems and feel better and, overcome obstacles and all that stuff. But I don't see villain much. I don't know if that's as common. I see victim a lot. God, it's just getting more rampant in society these days. And I found it to be, it's just like always a mess. Because as soon as you start to confront, let's say you confront someone who's acting victimized, especially if you feel like they're being victim to you. You're like, hey, I feel like you're being a victim right now. Now you're the victim for saying that, right? So it's
you're the persecutor in that instance.
It's just like, I'm feeling victimized by you being a victim, and it's just this like messy thing.
Yeah. You want to invite people out of it. So, hey, I'm curious what's going on for you. You seem to be down right now. You seem to be struggling right now. What would you do differently? How would you like to move out of this? Invite them to be curious about their own experience. What is going on for you? Without an agenda of, I need to fix it, I need to take your pain away, or they even need to fix it. Let go of the agenda that they need to fix it and just get curious. The world is so much easier and kinder when we all start with curiosity rather than judgment or blame. And unfortunately, what's happened now, especially coming back to our kind of main topic here in men and boys, is because men and boys aren't being as successful as they want to be and as successful as their fathers and their fathers were. So, these last couple of generations are the first two generations to be financially less well off than the generations before them. So they're looking at their father who's saying, just work harder. And it's like, well, hang on a second. You could have a job where you could work, afford a car or two. Your wife could stay at home, especially my father, kind of, if we're talking kind of, 60, 70 and older generation, you could work, afford 2 cars and buy your home, which cost $1,000, $2,000, and your wife could stay at home and raise the kids, and you had money to go on vacations. Where I'm working 2 jobs and my partner's working a job and we're just getting by because financially we're not doing as well. There is less money. Wages are less than they used to be. So you've got all these men and boys that are struggling and feeling like failures, and they're looking for people to blame. So blaming the government, right? They're voting against themselves and voting for politicians that aren't really interested in them, but they are saying hyperbolic things. It's minorities' fault, it's immigrants' fault, it's women's fault. Instead of, what can I take responsibility for? Where's my knowledge gap, right? What skill could I go and learn? What trade could I go and learn? Instead of saying, well, manufacturing doesn't exist in America anymore, we need to bring manufacturing back. It's not going to come back. We're not going to compete with China and Vietnam to produce goods. So what can I as a man do to learn a different skill so that I can still feel that I'm productive and I can provide and I can protect. And they're such important internal drivers for men. And we're not taking responsibility enough as men to go, how can I be different? We're blaming people. And there's a lot of blame in society.
So I'm curious, you've worked with a ton of participants, people who come to men's groups or just groups in general. What's the relationship between those who show up and do the work and then how their romantic partnerships, their health at home, and their career health, how have those things all changed for them since joining one of these groups and being a part of this kind of new means of personal development and growth?
I mean, it's hard for me to quantify that as somebody who's rather scientific and likes data. I haven't done studies on it, so I'm only going to give you anecdotal evidence. However, the anecdotal evidence from the men is things improve dramatically. Like, I'm talking dramatically.
Can you share any stories, even if they're anonymous?
Yeah. Let me think of it. So we had one guy come to our group. So when I start a group, or when a new man comes to a group, the first question I ask him is, what's brought you here? What brought you to this? And this guy comes to our group and shares about an incident with his child and his wife, and an argument that they had that really did not go very well. Involved the police being called, probably nefariously, but still that happened. And he came to the group just after having spoken to the police officer. Like, literally walked away from that conversation and came to the first group. And this guy is bawling and like super distraught about some of his actions and also what's happened and the experience he's had and the experience that his child's had with the police being called, and just absolutely distraught, and doesn't even know, like, he's sharing this all with us, doesn't even know what he wants for the group and where he wants to start. He just knows that he needs something. 4 years later.
This was his first day at the group?
This was his first day at the group.
Woo.
Right? And you'll be amazed at how often when I do groups, what tends to happen is I ask that question and people give me some, generic answers. Well, I'd like to be a better guy and I want to understand myself a bit better. Or I want a community and I'm feeling lonely, typical stuff. And then one guy will be like, all this shit's happened to me, and set the bar. And then everybody after him will be like, well, this stuff's happened to me too. So there's always one guy that really opens a group up. And I'm always there ready to share my story, to set that bar about, look, this is a place where you can get vulnerable. And very rarely do I need to share my story. There's always somebody that shares something. Like, we're all going through stuff. So this guy turns up that first night, and for the first 6 months, probably cries the majority of the call each time when it's his turn to share. He has been promoted 3 times. He's now second or third in command in a big company. His salary's probably tripled, quadrupled in the last 4 years. His relationship with his kids is completely different and so much better, to the point that what I get the guys to do is, once we've kind of got past the basic emotional models and language education, is I encourage them to come and lead and bring topics they're interested in. I give them some feedback on their leadership so they get to practice it, and they get to bring topics that they're really interested in. He did a wonderful topic on, or a wonderful presentation on what it means to be a good father, and led a really good conversation on that. That's how far this guy has come. And he has a really lovely new girlfriend. He's able to deal with his ex-wife in a way that he wasn't before the split, and he's so much more thoughtful, doesn't react to her provocation. He is able to lead in a completely different way than he was before. And he's just had this incredibly transformative experience. He's lost 75 pounds. I mean, he's just a different man. He's literally a different man. And now, so, one of the things we had with this guy, he believed his role was very much provider and protector. And when he first come to the group, if he wasn't emotionally destroyed himself, he thought his job was to tell other guys what to do. I banned him from being able to give any advice for a year. So for a whole year, he wasn't allowed to give any comment. All he could do was ask a question. And to begin with, he tried to give a comment or give a bit of advice as a question, and we wasn't allowed to do that. And this guy has just changed so much from understanding himself and from the love of 8 other men that looked at him and went, you're not a vile human being. You're a man who's struggling. How can we help you get to where you want to get to? And he is one of the most powerful leadership men in that group now and shows up all out every time that he comes to the group.
It makes me think it's just emotional fitness, which makes it seem simple and easy. It's like, all right, he wasn't a gold medalist winning athlete. Then he started training. Then he started winning medals and got fit, got a hot girlfriend, and like got promoted. Like, yeah, no shit, because he was training. If you're not doing the training, you're not gonna grow and succeed in your life.
I used to call, and still some of the marketing I do when I market the groups, I kind of call it the gym for your mind, because it is.
Yeah.
And what we do as men is we're very interested in our physical appearance often, especially in Western culture. God, when I go traveling the world, and I like to travel a lot, and I go to a lot of other countries, most other countries, men are not jacked. You come back to America and everyone's fucking jacked and huge. And it's like there's so much emphasis put on how big you are. And when I used to train, I was an elite sportsman. I used to train in bodybuilding gyms because they were the gyms where there was the best weight equipment. And the guys that just wanted to look big so that they could be the biggest guy in the pub or the bar. And I think there's too much emphasis on that and not enough emphasis on how do I show up in the world as a human being? How do I communicate skillfully with other people? I can tell you now, how big you are will get you noticed, but it's not gonna make you successful in business. It's not gonna make you that successful in attracting mates. When you ask women, they don't really care how big a guy is. They're much more interested in how he makes them feel than how big you are. And I think we miss that when we go back to this kind of stereotype media masculine. You look at guys now in Marvel movies and stuff, and they're all taking steroids, and they're all huge guys, these lead actors. They're not representing men. They're not representing the men that come to my group. So I think we're missing our way a bit about what it means to be a man just from that point of view. Like, that's not how men look. That's not how dads look when they're getting no sleep and they're struggling to find exercise. But what we can always do is show up with kindness and curiosity. We can always show up with mental fortitude. We can show up with resilience. I think resilience is something that, for me, is a really healthy masculine trait. Like, how can I endure? When you think of Viktor Frankl in this Nazi concentration camp, right? What could he do? He could endure and still find moments of peace and moments of community and moments of humor and moments of joy, even in the worst conditions that human beings have ever experienced. If he can do that, I think we can find joy, community, and compassion in our everyday life.
To wrap up, I'd love to ask you the same question I ask everyone now to wrap up the episode. What do you think it means to be a man today?
I'm just going to speak for me and what I think it means to be a man and how I would like other people to see me. So I want to be, this is a question I ask my founders, male and female. What do you want to be known for? So when you're on your deathbed, how do you want people to speak about you? And I don't want people to say he was rich. I don't want people to say, cool, he was a jacked athlete. I want people to say, I felt better when I was around Lee than when I wasn't around Lee. Lee helped me see things that I couldn't see about myself, and those things have made my life better. Lee was there when I needed him. I think one of the most important qualities of a man is to show up and be reliable. Mm-hmm. And I think we're really struggling with that in today's society. I think that is something I see a lot. People really struggle to be reliable. I think there's a huge amount of strength in being able to lead with vulnerability. And what I mean by that is the old leadership model was you knew everything, right? The leader must know everything and had all the answers. I believe the best leadership model is you come to me and you ask a question. If I don't know the answer to it, I say, I don't know the answer to that. Why don't we find out together? Or why don't you go find out and come back to me? Or why don't I find out, come back to you? Or why don't we both find someone who knows more about this than us and go and ask them? And when I get things wrong, I step up and I say, I got this wrong. This is how I got it wrong. This is how we're going to do things differently so that we don't make the same mistake again. I think if you don't have that kind of vulnerability as a leader, people won't follow you and people won't trust you. So I want to be loved for who I am and how I make other people feel. I want to be loved because I'm dependable. If you rang me at 2:00 in the morning and said, Lee, shit's gone sideways, I need you to come and help me, or I need you to come and get me out of jail, or just a massive argument with my wife, I need somewhere to stay. I'm like, be there in 10 minutes, mate. And I want to make people, and this is the hardest one for me, I want to make people feel better about themselves because they spend time with me rather than worse about themselves. One of the biggest issues for me, one of the struggles for me has been because I can see how the world can be better and how you can be better. I use that to make myself look smarter, and I kind of make you feel lesser and smaller because I'm pointing out what you can't see and what you could do differently. And my challenge is to do that in the most loving, profound, kind way possible so that to you it feels like love rather than belittling or making you smaller. Like, here's the opportunity rather than here's what you're doing wrong. And I want to have impact. And I think it's really important for men to stand up and have impact. And I think there's a lot of courage in, hey, things aren't good enough right now. We need to do things differently, rather than, America's perfect and we shouldn't change anything. Hey, we need to change some things because men are struggling and women are struggling and kids are struggling, and there's a better way of doing things. And how do I stand up and be part of the solution? And my way of being part of the solution is creating men's group, creating men's work, creating opportunity for men to come together and talk about how they could be better and how they want to be better.
Thank you so much for coming on. How can people find you?
So I like to make things easy, as I said earlier, Jake. So Lee Povey on everything.
Okay.
LeePovey.com, Lee Povey on LinkedIn, Lee Povey on Instagram. Come and talk to me. If you're a man, you want to have a conversation, come talk to me. I've always got time to talk to you. If you're a female leader, I coach female leaders too. I love having that experience with you. And I think one of the things I offer to female leaders is an experience with a healthy male leader so they can see what that looks like. And many of them haven't experienced that. And then how it allows them to kind of get into their leadership energy in a really nice, healthy way. But yeah, I'd love to have conversations. I've got some room in a couple of my men's groups right now, so reach out. I just want to keep building men's community so that we have healthy men.
Love it. Thank you for coming on, my friend.
Thank you.
This was awesome.
Wonderful.